Back in the late 60s, Ford was tired of watching the Camaro hog the spotlight. So they built the Boss 302, a machine tuned for revenge, tested like a war weapon, and dropped straight onto the racetrack. It crushed records, won championships, and made Chevy sweat bullets. But just when the Mustang was on top of the world, everything got messy. Ford's greatest muscle car was suddenly dragged into a scandal that nearly wrecked its legacy. So, what happened? And why did Chevy teams accuse Ford of foul play after losing fair and square? In this video, we will uncover the wild journey of the Boss 302 from factory battlegrounds to championship glory, scandal, global controversy, and a jaw-dropping comeback that no one saw coming. So buckle up, it's going to be a wild ride. In 1969, Ford was seriously getting hammered on the racetrack. The SCCA Trans-American Sedan Championship was the hottest racing series in the US, and Chevrolet's Camaro Z28 was the star of the show. Ford had the Mustang, sure, but nothing in the stable could match Chevy's 302 cubic inch small block, which had been built specifically to take advantage of the series' strict 305 cubic inch engine limit. Ford needed a response, and they needed it fast. So they brought in Larry Shinoda. He had just walked away from General Motors, where he helped shape legends like the Corvette Stingray. Ford scooped him up along with Seaman Bunky Knudsen, another former GM executive who had taken over as president of Ford. Together, they brought something to the table that Ford desperately lacked: racing swagger, aggressive styling, and an urge to humiliate their former employer. Shinoda called the new Mustang project Boss to keep people from asking questions. He'd just say, "That's the boss's car." But this wasn't just about looks. To race in Trans Am, Ford had to build at least 1,000 street-legal versions of its track car. That meant the Boss 302 had to be more than fast. It had to survive real roads and real buyers. Underneath the hood was a specially built 302 cubic inch V8, not to be confused with the standard 302 Windsor engine. This one had a 4-bolt main block, big port Cleveland heads for better airflow, a high-lift solid lifter camshaft, forged pistons, and a crankshaft that could take serious abuse. Factory rating, 290 horsepower. Actual output, closer to 350. Ford lowballed the numbers to avoid spooking insurance companies. Before release, the prototype went through 3,472 miles of brutal development testing. Engineers ran 50 full-throttle pulls to 7,200 RPM during engine validation, pushed the suspension through 17 different setups, and tested it in temperatures from -20 degrees Fahrenheit to 110 degrees Fahrenheit. When test driver Parnelli Jones reported axle hop issues during hard cornering at Riverside Raceway, engineers added staggered rear shocks, revised spring rates, and a better stabilizer bar. Every detail was battle-tested. Even the hood scoop design was tweaked to prevent carburetor icing, based on real-world trials at the Michigan State Police facility. Visually, the car stood out too. The 1969 Boss 302 had a low, menacing stance, flat black hood, and signature side stripes. But the 1970 version turned things up a notch. The shaker hood scoop was added to improve airflow and throttle response, while tweaks to the suspension gave it even better cornering. The flat black hood helped reduce glare, and the revised front spoiler reduced lift by 23% at 120 miles per hour, confirmed by real aerodynamic testing. This wasn't just Ford chasing a trend. This was Ford building a purpose-driven machine, engineered to attack Chevy where it hurt most on the scoreboard. But once the Boss 302 hit the track, it didn't just perform, it started embarrassing the competition. And that's where things got personal, giving Chevy a reason to protest. The 1969 Trans Am season was a tough learning curve for Ford. The Boss 302 had potential, but mechanical issues, inconsistent results, and a well-oiled Camaro operation left Ford in second place behind Chevrolet. So, for 1970, the Boss 302 was refined down to the bolts. Suspension geometry was recalibrated to keep the car more stable under braking and cornering. The shock absorber setup, perfected during the 1969 test programs, was made standard across all factory race cars. Ford also upgraded the car's cooling systems, improved air delivery with a revised shaker hood scoop, and added further tweaks to the front spoiler to reduce lift at high speeds. Even the tires were revised based on wear data from the previous season. It paid off instantly. The opening race at Laguna Seca in March 1970 was a statement win. Jones pushed the Boss 302 to the limit, taking first place and silencing critics who thought the Mustang couldn't last a full race without falling apart. From there, the momentum kept building. At Lime Rock Park in May, Ford swept the podium, Jones took the win, and Fulmer finished right behind him. It was domination, not luck. In June at Mid-Ohio, Fulmer returned the favor, grabbing first place while Jones played the team role to help maximize Ford's points haul. Watkins Glen in July delivered another 1-2 finish for Ford, reinforcing the fact that this wasn't a lucky streak, it was control. Over the full season, the Boss 302 claimed 6 wins in the 11-race series. Chevrolet was outgunned, outdriven, and eventually outscored. By the end of the season, Ford secured the 1970 SCCA Trans Am Manufacturers Championship. Parnelli Jones took home the Drivers' Championship. More importantly, the Mustang Boss 302 was no longer seen as a hopeful underdog. It had taken the top spot and shoved the Camaro off the throne. But just as Ford was popping champagne and celebrating their dominance, a dark cloud rolled in. Behind the scenes, Chevy wasn't done fighting. They were preparing a protest, and what they found under the hood would spark one of the biggest controversies in Trans Am history. When Ford clinched the 1970 Trans Am Championship, the Camaro camp wasn't just disappointed, they were suspicious. For most of the season, Chevy teams had been chasing taillights. The Boss 302 was pulling harder on the straights and hanging tighter in the corners. Something didn't add up, and by the final races, whispers turned into formal protests. Chevrolet filed for a teardown inspection, convinced that Ford had snuck in an illegal modification somewhere deep inside the engine bay. What they found didn't break the rules, but it raised eyebrows across the industry. Hidden under the valve covers of the Boss 302 was a camshaft that had never been disclosed during previous technical checks. It wasn't one of the standard Ford white book parts teams expected. This was a new grind, developed quietly and coded internally as the B9 camshaft. It changed the valve timing, duration, and lift characteristics just enough to give the engine an edge without violating the displacement or material restrictions in the rulebook. The B9 grind gave the Boss 302 an estimated 15 extra horsepower over the already potent setup. It wasn't outrageous on paper, but when combined with Ford's refined suspension, reduced lift from the aero upgrades, and tight chassis tuning, that small bump in power became a serious advantage. The issue wasn't that the part was illegal, it was that it hadn't been fully disclosed. Chevy argued it violated the spirit of the rules, even if it didn't violate anything. The media pounced. Headlines from automotive magazines and race reports framed the story as a sneaky camshaft scandal, implying Ford had gamed the system. For casual fans, the distinction between legal but undisclosed and flat-out cheating didn't matter. Public opinion turned fast. Ford had just delivered one of its proudest racing victories, and now it was being accused of playing dirty. The Boss 302 kept its title, and the championship wasn't overturned. But the damage was already done. Its reputation had been stained by a part that, while legal, had crossed a line for many people watching. Ford hadn't cheated, but they weren't exactly transparent either. And for a car built to be a public statement of dominance, that left a scar, prompting them to go silent for a few years. As racing headlines faded and the oil crisis took over just a few years later, muscle cars like the Boss 302 lost their shine fast. But decades later, in the unlikeliest of places, a tarp-covered survivor sparked a massive comeback. Let's talk about how one forgotten Mustang helped reignite an entire legend. By the mid-1970s, the muscle car party was over. Insurance premiums were through the roof, fuel prices had spiked thanks to the oil crisis, and environmental regulations were tightening. The Boss 302, once a track-borne beast with a loyal following, suddenly became a burden. Owners swapped out engines, stripped them for parts, or left them to rot behind barns. The same cars that once tore up racetracks were now forgotten in dusty corners of junkyards, unwanted and unloved. But in 1988, a bit of magic happened. At a salvage yard in Ohio, a worker stumbled on something buried under a tarp. a 1969 Grabber Orange Boss 302, complete with its original engine and components. This wasn't a beat-up clone or a Frankenstein rebuild, it was the real thing. When it hit the collector market, bidders went wild. It ended up selling for over 6 figures, a price tag that shocked even longtime Ford fans. That single sale was a wake-up call. People started paying attention again. The Boss 302 wasn't just a piece of old metal, it was history, a survivor. As word spread and restoration projects picked up, values climbed fast. Clean, numbers-matching Boss 302s became hot items at classic car auctions. By 2023, one pristine example crossed the block at the Mecum auction and hammered for $375,000. That car was a fully restored 1970 model in competition yellow, documented, untouched by rust, and tuned to perfection. What had once been junk is now pure gold, proving that legends don't fade. So, what's your take on the Boss 302? Was it a victim of envy, a rule bender, or just too good for its time? Drop your thoughts in the comments and hit subscribe for more wild stories from automotive history. Until next time, keep your foot down and the engine singing.